Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it watches, and sometimes it waits to be seen. In the spring of 2023, a team of researchers made a discovery that would challenge everything they understood about photography, memory, and what remains when people are gone. What they found was simple: a photograph, 122 years old, sealed in darkness, forgotten. But when they brought it into the light, they realized something was terribly, impossibly wrong. This is that story. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories that crawl under your skin and stay there, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and let yourself sink into this tale of something that should not exist, but does. March 14th, 2023. Hartley University, somewhere in the farmlands of central Illinois. The kind of place where corn stretches to the horizon and small towns carry names nobody outside the county has ever heard. Dr. Sarah Chen and her assistant, Marcus Webb, were 3 weeks into what they'd expected to be the most boring assignment of their careers. They worked for the university's historical preservation department, and their job that month was simple: go through the old storage rooms in the basement of the archives building, catalog everything, update the records, make sure nothing was deteriorating or getting lost to time. It was the kind of work that required patience more than skill. Dusty boxes, faded documents, the forgotten pieces of lives that nobody remembered anymore. The basement had no windows. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a flat, colorless glow. The air smelled like old paper and concrete. Rows of metal shelving units stretched from one end of the room to the other, packed tight with cardboard boxes and wooden crates that hadn't been opened in decades. Sarah was 34, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She'd been doing this kind of work for 9 years. She liked it. There was something honest about preserving the past, something that felt important, even when nobody else cared. Marcus was younger, 26, fresh out of grad school and still trying to figure out if he'd made the right choice studying history instead of something practical. He had a habit of humming while he worked, which sometimes drove Sarah crazy, but he was thorough, careful, good with details. They were on shelf unit 47 when Marcus found the box. It was different from the others, smaller, made of dark wood instead of cardboard, with a hinged lid held shut by a simple brass clasp. No label on the outside, no markings at all. "Got something weird here," Marcus said, lifting it down carefully. The wood was smooth, well made, like it had been crafted by hand. It felt heavier than it should have been for its size. Sarah walked over, pulling off her latex gloves. "What is it?" "Don't know yet. No label. Not in the system." They set it on the work table under the brightest light in the room. Sarah opened the clasp. The hinges creaked softly. Inside, wrapped in cloth that had once been white but had yellowed with age, was something flat and rectangular. Marcus carefully unwrapped it. A glass plate, large, maybe 8 inches by 10 inches. The kind photographers used in the late 1800s and early 1900s, before film became common. The glass was thick, heavier than modern glass, with a faint sepia tone visible even through the protective coating on the surface. There was a small paper tag tied to the corner with string. The ink had faded, but the writing was still legible. "The Ward Family, 1901. Sarah felt a small flutter of excitement. Glass plate photographs from that era were rare, especially ones that had been stored properly. If this was in good condition, it could be a significant find for their rural history collection. "Let's see what we've got," she said. They carried the plate to the dark room at the back of the basement. The university still maintained it for exactly this kind of work. Inside, they had everything they needed to develop and digitize old photographs without damaging them. Marcus set up the scanner while Sarah cleaned the glass plate with extreme care, using special solution and soft brushes to remove over a century of accumulated dust without scratching the emulsion. When she was finished, they placed it under the scanner. The machine hummed. Light moved across the glass, and slowly, on the computer monitor, the image began to appear. A family, 4 people, standing in front of a farmhouse. At first glance, it looked perfectly ordinary. A man on the left, probably in his 30s, wearing a dark suit and a bowler hat. His face was stern, the way people looked in old photographs when they had to stand still for long exposures. His hands were at his sides. A woman next to him, also in dark clothing, a long dress with a high collar. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her expression was neutral, unreadable. And two children in front of them, a boy, maybe 10 years old, and a girl slightly younger, both in simple clothing, both staring at the camera with that same serious expression everyone had in old photos. Behind them, a 2-story farmhouse, white-painted wood, a front porch, nothing fancy, the kind of house that dotted the Midwest by the thousands at the turn of the century. Well preserved, Marcus said. Really clear image for something that old. Sarah nodded, but she was still looking at the screen. Something felt off. She couldn't put her finger on it yet, but there was something about the image that made her uncomfortable. "Let's get it cataloged," she said. "Then we can start researching the family." They spent the rest of the day documenting the find. Measurements, condition assessment, high-resolution scans from multiple angles, everything by the book. But that night, when Sarah went home to her small apartment near campus, she couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. She'd opened the file on her laptop and was staring at it again. The Ward family, 1901. 4 people who'd been dead for over a century, frozen in time, staring out at her from her screen. She told herself it was just an ordinary photo, nothing strange about it, just history. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, she knew something was wrong. She just didn't know what yet. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the archives early. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she'd seen that photograph. The family standing there, watching. Marcus showed up 20 minutes later with coffee and a confused expression. "You okay?" he asked. "You look tired." "Couldn't sleep," Sarah admitted. "Been thinking about that photo." "The Ward family?" "Yeah." She pulled up the digital file on the computer. "Something's bothering me about it. Can't figure out what." They both stared at the screen. "Looks normal to me," Marcus said, but Sarah shook her head. "Look at the shadows." Marcus leaned closer. "What about them?" "They're going in different directions." It was subtle, easy to miss, but once she'd pointed it out, it was impossible not to see. The shadow of the father fell to his right, as if the sun was on his left side, but the mother's shadow fell almost straight down, like the light was directly overhead, and the children's shadows were somewhere in between, angled differently from both parents. "That's weird," Marcus said slowly. "Could it be multiple exposures? Sometimes photographers combined images back then." "Maybe," Sarah said. "But why would they do that for a simple family portrait?" She zoomed in on the children's faces. "Look at their eyes." Marcus squinted at the screen. "What am I looking at?" The boy is looking at the camera, straight on, but the girl, her eyes are pointed slightly to the right, like she's looking at something else. Could just be how she was standing. Could be. But Sarah didn't believe it. There was something intentional about the misalignment, something purposeful. She moved the image, scanning across the background. The farmhouse was clear, every detail visible. The windows, the porch railings, the front door slightly open. And then she saw it, near the tree on the left side of the image, almost invisible. A faint shape, lighter than the surrounding image, like something had been there but hadn't fully exposed onto the glass plate. "Marcus, what's that?" He looked, squinted. "I don't see anything." "Right there, by the tree." She adjusted the contrast, enhanced the image, and slowly the shape became clearer. A figure, standing partially behind the tree trunk, tall and thin. The details were blurred, almost erased, but there was definitely someone there, someone who didn't want to be seen, or couldn't be seen clearly. Sarah felt cold. "Okay," Marcus said quietly. That's creepy. Could be a neighbor who walked into frame during the exposure? Maybe. But the figure wasn't moving. It wasn't blurred from motion. It was just faint, like it was only halfway there. Sarah saved the enhanced image and sat back. Let's research the family, find out who they were. They spent the next 2 days diving into records, county archives, census data, birth and death certificates, property records, newspaper archives, everything they could find about families named Ward who lived in that region around 1900, and they found nothing. No Ward family listed in the census for 1900 or 1910, no property deeds, no birth records, no death records, nothing. It was like they'd never existed. That doesn't make sense, Marcus said, frustrated. We have a photograph. They had to exist. Sarah checked the archive logs for the wooden box. According to the records, it had been added to the collection in 1952. But there was no donor name listed, no acquisition notes, just a date and a location code that didn't match any current storage area. This is bizarre, she muttered. She expanded the search, checked adjacent counties, looked for alternate spellings of Ward, checked for families with 2 children in the right age range. Nothing matched. It's like they were ghosts, Marcus said, trying to make it sound like a joke. Sarah didn't laugh. On the 3rd day, she decided to focus on the photograph itself, not the family, but the location. The farmhouse in the background was distinctive enough that maybe they could identify it through architectural records or old property photographs. She sent the image to Professor Garrett in the architecture department, asking if he could help identify the building style and possible location. He called her back 2 hours later. Sarah, this is fascinating, he said. His voice sounded excited. The house in your photograph is definitely from the 1880s or 90s. Classic Midwestern farmhouse design. Simple balloon frame construction. I actually think I might know which house this is. You do? Yeah. There's a historical property survey from the 50s that documented old farmhouses in the region. I think I've seen this one before. Give me a few hours to check my records. Sarah hung up, feeling hopeful for the first time in days. Professor Garrett called back just before 5 in the afternoon. His voice was different now, quieter, uncertain. Sarah, I found the house, he said. That's great. Where is it? It was on County Road 43, about 15 miles northwest of here, the Brennan property. But Sarah, there's a problem. What kind of problem? The house burned down in 1897. Complete loss. The entire family died in the fire. Father, mother, and 3 children. Sarah felt her stomach drop. That can't be right. Our photo is dated 1901. I know, Professor Garrett said. That's why I'm calling. Your photograph shows a house that was destroyed 4 years before the photo was supposedly taken. Sarah ended the call and just sat there, staring at the photograph on her screen. The Ward family, standing in front of a house that no longer existed. A house that had burned 4 years before this picture could have been taken. Marcus was watching her. What did he say? She told him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Marcus said, Maybe the date on the label is wrong. Maybe it was taken before 1897 and someone just mislabeled it later. Maybe, Sarah said, but she didn't believe that either. That night she stayed late at the archives, alone. She pulled up the photograph again and started going through it inch by inch with image enhancement software, looking for anything they'd missed. She zoomed in on the faint figure by the tree, enhanced it as much as she could without destroying the image quality, and she saw something that made her hands shake. The figure had a face now, blurred but visible, a woman, older. Her expression was strange, not quite fear, not quite sadness, something in between. She was looking at the camera, looking at whoever was taking the picture, and her mouth was open like she was trying to say something. Sarah enhanced the image more, adjusted the levels, and then she saw something else. Between the 2 children in the front of the photograph, right between them, where there should have been nothing but empty space, there was a hand, small, pale, resting on the boy's shoulder, a child's hand, but there was no child attached to it. Sarah closed the laptop and left the building, walking quickly through the dark campus back to her car. She told herself it was just artifact noise from the scanning process, just pixels arranged in a way that looked like something, but she couldn't stop shaking. And that night, she didn't sleep at all. The next morning, Sarah called Marcus before he left for the archives. "We need to do an infrared scan of the plate," she said. No hello, no explanation. "Why?" Marcus asked, sounding half awake. "Just trust me. I found something in the image. I need to confirm it's not just digital artifact." They met at the university at 7 in the morning. The building was empty. The hallways echoed with their footsteps. In the darkroom, Sarah carefully removed the glass plate from its protective sleeve. Her hands were steady now. She'd spent the whole night preparing herself for what they might find. Infrared scanning was a technique used to detect layers and details in old photographs that weren't visible to the naked eye or normal scanning. Different materials reflected infrared light differently, which meant they could see things that had been erased, covered, or were simply too faint to detect normally. Marcus set up the infrared camera while Sarah positioned the glass plate under controlled lighting. "What exactly are we looking for?" he asked. "A fifth person," Sarah said. Marcus stopped what he was doing. "What?" "Between the two children. I think there's someone else in the photograph." "Sarah, I've looked at this image a dozen times. There's 4 people. That's it. Just run the scan." He did. The infrared camera clicked. The image appeared on the monitor in false color, showing different materials and layers in the photograph. And there she was, a little girl, standing between the two children, smaller than both of them, maybe 5 or 6 years old, wearing a simple dress. Her outline was faint, much fainter than the other figures, like she'd been underexposed or was somehow less present than everyone else. But she was there, clearly, undeniably, and her face. Unlike the blurred, unclear quality of her body, her face was sharp, clear, her eyes were wide, her mouth was slightly open, and she was looking directly at the camera, directly at whoever was taking the picture, not the neutral, serious expression of the other family members. This girl looked scared. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered. Sarah zoomed in on the girl's image. "She's not a printing error. She's in the original emulsion. Someone photographed this child, but she didn't develop properly, or couldn't develop properly." "What does that mean?" "I don't know." Sarah sat back, her mind racing. 5 people in the photograph, not 4, but the 5th person was only barely there, caught between visibility and absence. "We need to check the property records again," she said. "Professor Garrett said the family that died in the fire had 3 children. We need to find out who they were." It took them another full day of research, but they finally found it. The Brennan family, George and Martha Brennan, and their 3 children, Thomas, age 10, Sarah, age 8, and Elizabeth, age 5. They died on November 3, 1897, when their farmhouse caught fire in the middle of the night. The cause was determined to be a lamp knocked over in the children's bedroom. The entire family was buried in St. Michael's Cemetery, about 12 miles from campus. Sarah stared at the records. 3 children, the same number of children in the photograph if you counted the faint girl. The same ages. "The Ward family doesn't exist," she said slowly, "but the Brennan family does, or did." "You think the label was wrong? That this is actually the Brennan family?" "I think it's worse than that." Sarah pulled up the enhanced infrared image. "I think this photograph was taken after they died." Marcus looked at her like she was crazy. "That's impossible." "Is it? The house burned down in 1897. This photo is dated 1901, 4 years later. And yet here's the house, undamaged. Here's the family, standing in front of it, including the youngest daughter, who should have been dead." "Sarah, what you're suggesting—" "I know what I'm suggesting." She pointed at the faint girl on the screen. "Elizabeth Brennan, 5 years old. She's in this photograph, but she's not fully there. She's like a shadow, like an echo." "This is insane." "Then explain it," Sarah said. Explain how a photograph from 1901 shows a house that burned down in 1897. Explain how the family in it matches a family that died in that fire. Explain the fifth person who's barely visible. Marcus had no answer. Sarah ran the scan again, this time with different filters, different enhancement techniques, and with each new analysis, the image became stranger. The faint girl's eyes were more detailed than they should be, as if she was the only part of the image that had been truly focused. The background shadows, when measured precisely, corresponded to late afternoon sun. November. The angle matched perfectly with November 3rd, the date the family died, and one more detail, one that Sarah almost missed. When she magnified the farmhouse windows in the background, she could see something inside, barely visible, a glow, orange and red, fire. The house in the photograph was burning, but you could only see it if you looked very, very closely. Sarah and Marcus spent the next week trying to trace the origin of the wooden box. They needed to know where it came from. Who had donated it? Why it had been sealed away with no records. The archive logs said it was added in 1952, but there was no name attached. Sarah filed requests with the university administration, searching for any records of donations or acquisitions from that year. Finally, they got a response. A property clearing had taken place in August 1952. The estate of Helen Brennan, last surviving member of the Brennan family line. She died at age 83 with no children, and her property had been sold. Some items had been donated to the university. Helen Brennan had been George Brennan's niece. Sarah and Marcus drove out to the county records office and pulled Helen's estate files. Most of it was standard: furniture, books, personal effects. But there was a note at the bottom of the inventory list. One wooden box, contents unknown, donated per instructions in personal letter. Do not open. Sarah felt cold. Someone sealed that box and specifically said not to open it. For 70 years, Marcus added. They tracked down Helen Brennan's remaining family. There wasn't much left. A great-nephew living in Cedar Rapids. They called him. His name was David Marsh. He was 67 years old and had never met Helen, but he remembered his grandmother talking about her. She was a strange woman, David said over the phone. Kept to herself. My grandma said Helen used to talk about the house, the one that burned down. She'd say things like, "They never left," or "It keeps them." Nobody understood what she meant. "Do you remember anything else?" Sarah asked. "Just one thing. My grandma told me that when Helen was dying, she kept saying, 'The house always keeps the truth.' Over and over." The nurses thought she was confused, but my grandma said Helen was perfectly lucid. She meant it, whatever that means. Sarah thanked him and hung up. "The house always keeps the truth," Marcus repeated. "What does that mean?" "I think," Sarah said slowly, "it means that house, wherever it is now, whatever it became, it recorded what happened. And somehow, that photograph captured it." She pulled up the infrared image again on her laptop. The faint girl staring at the camera, Elizabeth Brennan, 5 years old, dead since 1897, but still there in the photograph, still watching. "We need to scan it one more time," Sarah said. "Why?" "Because I think the image might be changing." Marcus stared at her. "That's not possible. Nothing about this is possible." They went back to the archives that night, set up the scanner again, loaded the glass plate one more time, and when the image appeared on the screen, Sarah's breath caught. The girl was clearer now, more defined. Her face had more detail. Her expression was sharper. And her eyes, they were looking directly at the camera, but there was something different about them. Something Sarah hadn't seen before. Recognition. The girl's face showed recognition, like she was looking at something she understood, something she knew. She was looking at the scanner, at the camera, at them. "This isn't possible," Marcus whispered. But it was happening. Sarah saved the image and compared it to the scans they'd taken earlier, side by side on the screen. In the first scan, the girl's expression had been neutral, scared, maybe, but distant. In the second scan, her eyes had been more focused. In this third scan, her face showed clear emotion, clear awareness. "She's reacting to us," Sarah said. "Every time we scan the image, she becomes more present, more aware." "How?" "I don't know." Sarah's voice was shaking now. "But I think we need to stop." "Stop what?" "Looking at her, scanning her, bringing her forward." Marcus backed away from the computer. "This is insane. Photographs don't change. They can't change." "This one does." Sarah carefully wrapped the glass plate and put it back in its protective case. Then she sealed the wooden box again, exactly as they'd found it. "We need to report this," Marcus said. "Report what?" Sarah asked. "That we found a photograph of dead people taken 4 years after they died. That the image is somehow alive? That it's aware of us? Who's going to believe that?" Marcus had no answer. They locked the box in the secure archives vault. Level 3 security, climate controlled, no unauthorized access. And for 3 days, they told no one what they'd found. But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop seeing that girl's face, the recognition in her eyes. On the 4th day, she went back to the vault alone. She told herself she was just checking on it, making sure it was secure. But really, she wanted to see the photograph one more time. She opened the box, unwrapped the glass plate, held it up to the light, and gasped. The image had changed again. The girl wasn't between the children anymore. She was standing in front of them, closer to the camera, closer to the viewer. Her face was completely clear now, perfect detail. She was looking directly out of the photograph with an expression that Sarah couldn't quite read. Not quite fear, not quite sadness. Something closer to longing, like she wanted something, needed something. Sarah wrapped the plate quickly and put it back in the box. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She sealed the vault and walked out of the archives building into the bright afternoon sun, and she made a decision. This photograph could never be seen again. 2 weeks later, the wooden box containing the glass plate photograph was transferred to the university's restricted collection, a special archive reserved for items deemed too fragile, too valuable, or too sensitive for general access. The official cataloging label read, "Anomalous glass plate, origin unknown, date disputed, restricted access by special permission only." Sarah wrote a brief report for the archives. It mentioned the discovery of the photograph, the unusual date discrepancy with the farmhouse, and the difficulty identifying the family depicted. It made no mention of the 5th figure, no mention of the changing image, no mention of what she believed was happening. The report was filed. The box was locked away, and officially that was the end of it. But Sarah kept copies of all the scans, every version of the image, from the first one to the last. She stored them on an encrypted drive and kept them locked in her desk drawer at home. She told herself it was for documentation purposes, for research, in case someone ever needed to verify what they'd found. But really, she just couldn't let it go. Marcus left the university 3 months later, took a position at a museum in Boston. He never said it was because of the photograph, but Sarah knew. He'd stopped sleeping well after that last scan, started having nightmares. He needed to get away from it. Sarah didn't blame him. She stayed, kept working in the archives, kept doing her job. But she never went back to that restricted section, never asked to see the wooden box again. She didn't need to, because sometimes late at night when she was alone in her apartment, she would open the encrypted drive and look at the scans, all of them in sequence, watching the progression, watching the girl become more present, more aware, more real. And in the very last scan, the one she'd taken alone, the one she'd never shown Marcus, the girl wasn't just looking at the camera anymore. She was smiling, just slightly, a small, sad smile, like she was grateful, like someone had finally seen her, finally acknowledged that she was there. Sarah never told anyone about that final detail. She just kept it locked away, along with the rest of the truth. Sometimes late at night, she would wonder what would happen if someone scanned the plate again. Would the girl move closer? Would she become even more clear? Would she eventually step out of the photograph entirely? Sarah didn't know, and she was afraid to find out. The wooden box sits in the restricted archives to this day, sealed, locked away, surrounded by climate-controlled darkness. The glass plate inside remains undisturbed, and the girl in the photograph, Elizabeth Brennan, 5 years old, dead since November 3rd, 1897, remains frozen in that impossible moment, standing in front of a house that no longer exists, part of a family that should not be there, still visible, still watching, still waiting. The archives log for the item was updated one final time, 6 months after the discovery. Sarah added a single note to the restricted access requirements. It reads, "Do not scan, do not photograph, do not view without authorization." And underneath, in smaller letters, a note that most people who see it assume is just archival caution. The subject is reactive to observation. Nobody knows what that means. Nobody except Sarah. And late at night, when the archives building is empty and dark, when everyone has gone home and there's nothing but silence and shadows, sometimes the security guard who makes his rounds past the restricted section swears he hears something. A sound like breathing behind locked doors, a whisper like a child's voice, calling, waiting, wanting to be seen again. But the door stays locked, the box stays sealed, and the truth stays hidden, because some things from the past should never be brought fully into the light. Some images should never be developed completely, and some ghosts should never be given the attention they're seeking. The Ward family photograph, or whatever it really is, remains exactly where it is, in darkness, in silence, in a box that was meant to stay closed, and Elizabeth Brennan stays inside it, still watching through time, still caught between what was and what could never be, still there, always there, waiting for the next person curious enough to look, waiting for the next scan that might bring her one step closer. But that person won't be Sarah. She knows better now. She knows that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some photographs aren't meant to be understood, and some children who died over a century ago should be allowed to rest, even if they're still watching, even if they're still waiting, even if somewhere in that sealed box in the dark, a little girl with clear, aware eyes is still looking at the camera, still smiling that small, sad smile, still hoping that someone will see her again, still hoping, still waiting, still there. The photograph remains in the Hartley University restricted archives. If you know where to look, you can find the catalog entry, item number R-1852, anomalous glass plate, 1901, but you can't see it. They made sure of that. And maybe that's for the best, because some images have power. Some photographs capture more than just light, and some things that were lost don't want to stay that way. They want to be found. They want to be seen. They want to be remembered. And once you give them that attention, once you acknowledge them, once you bring them into focus, they never quite go away. Sleep well.